Okay, now let's work on an example bashrc file to see how we can put into practice what we have learned, and also what kind of practical commands we can set up in a bashrc that will make working with the command line kind of easier. So let me open a terminal first. Yes, what I did was to prepare this example bashrc here from my command line course week 4 example bashrc, and I will copy this to my home directory with the name bashrc. Don't forget to put the dot before it. This is the actual name of the file, so you should be using the complete name for it to be effective. And then I will open this up in Nano to see what kind of properties there are. Now, the first thing that we are going to do in this video is to get some colors on Nano so that these commands are more meaningful. Nano is okay to use without any colors if you are writing only text files, but if you are using it to write some kind of code, like bashrc or Perl or Python or whatever, I think what makes it really usable is only to have this color syntax highlighting on. So let's first see how we can do this so that you can also arrange your own color highlighting. Now, if you are working on Linux, you can skip these steps, but it turns out that in Mac, the Nano coloring files don't come by default. So one thing you can do is I set them up in Moodle. You can find the links here already. So is to follow these commands. So for enabling the syntax coloring in Nano in Mac, we have already done these steps for the previous weeks for installing wget, but it recommends us to install Ruby. This most likely comes with a Ruby syntax highlighting for Nano, and then all the other color highlightings also come with it. So first go and brew install Ruby in your system, and then you can brew upgrade or brew install Nano depending on whether you have a Nano installation or not. And this kind of Ruby installation and then the appropriate upgrading of Nano is going to bring the color highlighting files in your computer. So if you are working on Linux, you can already skip this step, and then we are going into this step. Now, under a share folder for Nano, there is all these syntax highlighting files. You should first go and locate these files in your computer. One way to find them, where we expect them to be under USR somewhere, but for example in my Mac they are under USR local and share and Nano, so slightly different directory. This is just USR share Nano, and mine is USR local share Nano. As we talked about this, these kind of things are unfortunately pretty common in Unix environments, so you may need to search for the exact location of your files. Depending on the different configuration of the system, they can exist in different places. So one way to do this, to search for the exact location, first of all you can just go and search these folders, and it's a high likelihood that you can find these coloring files there. But you can also do, for example, I want to search for the name Nano under the USR directory. So this command is combining these two commands. The find USR, this goes and lists every folder and file under the USR directory, and what grep does is it selects the lines that has Nano in it. So I will go and search for this. Maybe this is a bit too much, so I'm going to search for, say, this exact file. And mine is found here. I can also find the same file if I have this here. Under this directory is a shorter name than this, and the file find doesn't show me this folder, but it only shows me this folder. This is likely because this first directory is a symbolic link to the second more specific directory. We will see about symbolic links later. Basically, this is a shortcut so that the system can show to this more specific which version of nano kind of more specific directory. That's why find was not able to find all these in here, but by going through the actual link. It doesn't matter. I can use both of these links. So what I will do now is, well, I will open the nano RC file. We will recognize the RC here. This is similar to bashrc, and it also starts with a dot. It's also in my home directory. This file is now a configuration file for nano. So what you should be doing is opening this file with an editor. It can also be nano, and adding there this line include, and then the path to our RC files and star dot nano RC. This is going to include all of these syntax highlightings for all different languages. So for C language, for HTML language, for Java language, all of these nano RC files describe how to do syntax highlighting for one language. So basically this asterisk is including all of them in this nano RC file. And then save it and close it. And the next time you open up nano, it should have the syntax highlighting. So now we can continue with our bashrc file. But this is actually an important idea. So to modify the behavior of this kind of command line tools like nano, or if you are using the Vim editor, there is a corresponding .vimrc file, for example. I should have one. Something like this. So my vimrc file is also giving me color syntaxing by opening the syntax option. So the exact format of each file is different. Of course, it's depending on the Vim program, but basically these .rc files keep up the configuration for these command line tools. So this in general useful idea to know. And then if you come across with some kind of, I'm not sure, like pico rc for example, then you have an understanding of what file that is. It's a configuration file basically. So let's now start with our bashrc file, which is the configuration file for our bash. As we talked about, because I'm working in Mac, normally this bashrc file would not be meaningful, but it's working only because I have this redirection in my bash profile to go and read my bashrc. If you are working in Linux, then this is not necessary. Basically, you can just use this file. So first of all, I have this export command now here. So in every terminal that I just started, like this one, my gmd_dir is valid. Otherwise, it would quit to be valid as soon as I closed my initial shell that I make this setting. So now this setting is valid for every bash that I'm opening. The second is something that I find very useful. This is arranging the command ls so that it will give you a colored output. There are two formats for this. I'm using the first line. This is for Mac. The arguments for ls are slightly different. There are different ls flavors in Mac and Linux. And the second format is for working in Linux. So what we do is we use the alias command. Alias gives this command a short alias. So when I say ls, now it doesn't invoke the regular ls without any arguments, but it invokes this ls with this extra argument. Let's try. I will make a new tab here maybe. like this. So now my ls is equivalent to invoking this ls with the capital G argument in Mac. And if you are working in Linux, then you should comment out this first line using this sharp sign, and you should open this second line, and using the ls now it will give you this it will open up, it will be evaluated as this version. Well, let's continue with what other aliases one can use. For example, if you are using the history or less options frequently, then it may be useful to alias these as these short letters. Say, for example, now age is an alias for my history. This is very useful to know, this history. This is a recording of all older commands. And if you, for example, here have a very complicated command that you want to replicate, then you can use the number of that command with exclamation mark before it, and this is going to repeat the same command. For example, like this one is going to give me an ls command here. So basically it's not meaningful for very short commands, but if you're super long commands with a lot of pads and that you don't want to write again, then this is in general useful. So it makes sense to shorten history as age, so that this kind of scheme is also kind of useful. Maybe it doesn't work very nice to write history every time here. Another shortcut similar to this is good to know is this notation, double exclamation marks, and this is going to repeat the last command that I have given, basically. So another thing that can be nice is to give an alias to less by the letter L. So I think this is also pretty useful. Now I have piped my history to less, and this pipe less is a very common command in general, so I think it's quite useful to make it shortened as the L version. Another place where alias can be useful is, for example, if you have these different versions of Python or different versions of libraries, and when you say Python, then you want to make sure that the version 2.7 is being run instead of version 3.6, for example, then you can alias Python to show that version of Python. So, for example, when I say Python here, and then my 2.7 version is going to be opened. And one nice alias that I like using is for these SSH commands, which are typically quite long. So if I want to access Taito, it's usually always the same command for me. So one nice alias for me is to use this Taito name as the SSH command. So this basically makes an SSH connection for me. I find these kind of commands quite useful if I'm working with the command line, because the basic idea of command line is it's very effective. Things are easy to do, and there's absolutely no point in writing things in the long version if they are commands that you frequently use. Another thing is, for example, for going to my directories. For example, is this MATLAB directory is something that I use quite often, so I put a mat in it as a cd command, and using this mat is going to okay, I must have recently changed my directories, but let's try this one, for example. I think this should be working. Yeah, it's going to take me to this directory quickly. Okay, so we have seen how alias can be useful. I think it's a pretty useful trick to know. So now let's see how we can set up a prompt in this bashrc files. This setting up the prompt is, I think, one of the reasons that one really starts to use the bashrc and then other things come along, but at least it's for me how I started up. So you have this prompt here and you want to personalize it, kind of. You have a lot of things you can use in a prompt. I will close this one off for now. So I will just, let's first start with this kind of useful prompt, so as to say. So in the prompt, we are going to set up this ps1 variable, and for example, it's possible to say to use a prompt that is something like, for example, like this. Oh, I always confuse my shorthands with the Vim shorthands. So this will be a Control O and then right. And in my other terminal, now how do I read the settings from this bashrc? Do you remember? I either source it or I start a new bash with this. And now in my new bash, this is my new prompt. And this is exactly like the prompt that expects some kind of command from me and then gives me the result. So you are very flexible in setting this up. For example, I can use a empty character, space character here. And I can read the same thing using bash. And now can you see the difference? Now there's a space character here before the place that I can give in my command. You can use a new line, for example, or let's use a new line here. So what is this going to do? Let's again start a new bash. So now this is what I get, a new line before my prompt. So basically, before my prompt there is always a new line. I like using in this style, so my commands are not cramped like this, but of course this is more space efficient, so maybe working in a laptop you may prefer this one, but I personally, I'm fond of this kind of empty line scheme. So so what will happen now if I exit from this bash? Do you have any idea what will happen to the prompt? Let's try this. Have you noticed that I am now fallen back to my previous bash? So it is the bash in, okay, where was it? In here. Because I closed this second bash and now therefore I'm back to this bash. If I also exit from this one, then I'm back to this bash without any new spaces here, without any space characters there. Anyways, so you can write whatever you like here, make it a, say a $sign or whatever, like an arrow or whatever, but you can also use this prompt to give you some information which can be useful. For example, if you are working in a multi-user system, or if you are working in your computer and then connecting to Taito, so your user is changing every time and maybe your host is also changing every time. So this kind of shorthands are set to give us some information about the current system. What are the shorthands that we can use? So \u, of course, here when it's used in PS, the coloring is horrible for that, but this is going to correct, yeah. This will note the username. So if I have a \u in my prompt and afterwards, let's say I have a, yeah, here I have a $sign. So this kind of, again the wrong shortcut, this kind of setting, and I should comment this out of course, otherwise it will be an error here. Yes, this kind of setting is going to show me my username between these square brackets because of this, and then a dollar sign, and then a space character. Oop. So I can, for example, also add my host name here with a \h. This is very common format, username at hostname, so I will be using that one. So now my hostname is added here, and it can be useful if you are, for example, connecting to different computers all the time and want your prompt to display which computer you are in currently. Other useful shortcuts is one is the \, and W. This shows the working directory. So this is now my home directory for me, and then if I go to command line course week 4, then you will notice that this has been different here. So the prompt is including the directory information now. Because this directory information can get quite long, so if I go to here, for example, then basically my prompt is almost at the end of the line. I don't like this very much, so what I usually do is I take this working directory to the beginning of the prompt and I put a new line in between. So what's going to happen now? Let's save this and then make a bash. Now my directory is here on top of the prompt. And yes, I think I want to take this square bracket to here, and I also want to put a new line here so that it will be still more easily readable. And this is my new bash, for example, with my prompt up here, with my directory up there. Yeah. Okay, other things that you may want to do is, for example, include the time information. This is in hours, minutes, and seconds. And if you want to go really fancy, you can also add the day information, which is week, day, month, and year. Let's save this one and open up another bash. Yes, so here is now my prompt is showing the directory top and username and host name and time and end date. Well, there are a lot of things that you can use. You can use, for example, also the shell environment using this \s, or you can use the number of your commands here. Let's write this, and then let's set up another bash. So now this is giving me what kind of shell that I'm working in. Is bash is not surprising, and this is keeping track of my number of commands starting from this moment, so in this bash. So with ls it will increase 1, with cmd line course it will increase another 1, with this cd it will increase another 1. So you can put a lot of stuff here in your prompt. I think a good idea is to decide what kind of information you really need, and then don't really put too many useless stuff. So this is one kind of useful prompt. And I will show you another, well, fancy prompt that is not so informative as this, but is one that I like to use myself. First, the first idea is that we can use colors here in our prompt. Maybe you have noticed that my prompt usually when I'm talking in the videos is colorful. It has blues and reds in it. I like seeing some colors in the console. Also, it makes the difference between the prompt and my command more obvious. Now it's difficult for me to visually see where my command starts really. So the colors are defined with these really weird characters, unfortunately. So for example, to say that something is going to be printed in red, that should be followed or preceded with these characters. So this is the escape character, and for this square bracket, so marks this as a special character, and this is the escape character for this well this command. And then the colors are defined by these characters here. So a 0 here means a dark color, and a 1 here means a light color, and this 31 is, for example, is the code for red. So 0 and 31 is a normal red, and a 1 and 31 is going to give us a lighter or brighter in general red. And if there's a green here, a 0, 32 is green, and a 1 and 32 is light green. These characters are really well, they are difficult to read. So what I generally do is I define them first as variables and denote that red means this string for me. So now let's use these colors in our prompt. How do we do this? Is before saying, for example, use the working directory, show the working directory here, I switch the color to one of the colors. So brown, for example, is going to give a similar color to this one, kind of a dirty yellow that's easier to read. And then I write the working directory, and then I switch back to color to none. I need to do this because if I switch my color to brown and if I stay there, then all my following commands is going to be written in brown. We can try this, for example. And I will open this second prompt, and I will comment out this higher prompt. Okay, yes, I have already commented that out. So what this prompt is going to do now is it will put a new line and it will switch to brown color. It will print out the working directory, put a new line, and put this prompt symbol, which here I have arranged to be this $sign. So if I write this out, and then if I get a new tab, for example, then you will notice that everything is in brown now. As long as, I mean, here it's different because ls is using its own colors, but other than that, everything I do is in the brown color because I switched to brown here and then I didn't change back. So here I should put another command, and I should make that a color none to make sure that I go back to the black color. And now here my working directory is in this brown. So here, and afterwards, before going to the new line, I return to the black color. So this is one thing that I like doing. So I give a color to this kind of working directory. And another thing that I like doing is using my conda environment, because I work with conda environments very frequently, so I want to know at every moment which kind of environment I'm working in. You can use other information here, so I like using conda environment myself, but maybe you can use the name of your Git branch here, so anything like anything that you can think of is can be possible. So how do I use the conda environment? First I test if such a variable exists. So this is a test, and let's see here if this environment variable exists. I can echo it. It exists and it's name is base. That's because no conda environment is active at this moment. So if it didn't exist, this would be an empty string and basically it will be skipped. But if it exists, then I will use it in my prompt. I will use it in red color, and this will be including the base name of this conda environment. That's because the conda environment can be base, but it can also be something 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 name of environment. So the environments are generally they are paths. For example, something like this anaconda tree, and then I think env and Fortran. For example, I have a Fortran environment, but this environment will include the whole path name. And this base name, kind of given a path name, it takes only this last part and discards this previous parts of it. So this base name will be used in making that smaller, and then I will return back to no color for the rest of the prompt. Here I will switch back again to brown. So for example, here we can do this. I will be using the value of my conda environment here. Let's see. This will give me this kind of conda environment. I think I have a spurious backslash n there, so I should be taking my backslash n here. Yes, and this is the general prompt that I like using. And for example, you can change this prompt symbol here, for example, something like this, and this is going to give you this kind of prompt, for example. Okay, so we have seen quite a lot of ways of making this prompt more fancy. Let's continue with other environment variables that you can use here. For example, this one, it defines my preferred editor as Vim. These are I took from the web. I'm not using them myself currently, but for example, it can be useful if you are working in Java to define a Java home and some kind of default Java options. We will be talking about them more in the next week when we are talking about installing Java libraries and programs. This class path is also, we will be talking about this. This is also for Java, so that it can find the Java jars easily. But for now, the important thing that I want to talk about today is this path. So I talked briefly about path. Now let's have a more systematic talk about this. So what is path? Why do we need it? We need path when we want to run an executable. What is an executable? An executable is something that you can run in your system as a process. So for example, ls, here I give it as a command, it does something. Ls is an executable. In general, an executable should have the execute rights. So for example, this file .txt, this kind of text file, it's not for running, it's not a program, it's a text file for reading. So it doesn't matter if it has execute rights, and it actually doesn't make a lot of sense if it has execute rights. Let's see what kind of rights it has. Yeah, I don't see any access here, so text files by default don't have the execute rights. But for example, this script that I prepared for showing in the first video, this does have execute rights because this is a program that I can actually run. It's a bash script. You will see more about scripts in the forthcoming videos this week. So when I'm running a executable, of course I must denote its name first. But if I just give the name, bash is going to tell me that the command is not found. That's because there are default places that bash tries to run commands that I give from the command line. For example, if I say ls, it will go and check these default places, and it's going to execute the executable name ls it finds first. So bin is one of these folders, and if I give a, for example, more fancy command, then usr local bin is also one of these places. That's why when I say ls or when I say wget, I don't need to specify the path of this command to the system, because it has this path variable, this one, which it goes and checks every time I give it a command. So part of this is well, it is extra because I have run this bash command over and over again, and every time it was adding on this path, but I think until here is the or something like this is the, yeah. So this is, or the whole of it doesn't matter, it's just the same directories are writing again and again. For example, I can see anaconda bin here multiple times. This path is the list of directories that it's going to check when I give it a command. So when I tell the shell to ls, it goes and checks first this anaconda tree bin. Is there an ls here? So let's see what's there. These are the binaries related to anaconda, so I don't expect to find an ls here. The ls is the system command. What else was in path? This usr local bin. Then it goes and checks this usr local bin. Of course I'm using ls, but it's not using ls to do this. It's for showing me in the just in the window, but basically the operating system can check for this. So there is nothing here as well. And what is the next one? usr bin. So it checks usr bin. Is there an ls here? Also no. Yeah, nothing that matches ls. There are these partial matches, but it's looking for a full match here, a complete match. So the next one was, let's echo again the path. The next was in bin. So is there an ls here? Yes, it has found the ls in the fourth possible path in the path variable. So it goes and runs this ls. So basically when I say ls, it's actually executing bin ls. That's why when I say which ls, it tells me I'm running the ls in bin. So what's the point of giving this which ls? The idea is that the shell executes the first ls that it has encountered. So for example, if there's another ls in this s bin, it can be, but it won't be, but could have been another ls that maybe I added here by myself, or maybe I went and I put an ls in one of my own binaries, but the system won't find that one. It will execute the first one that it had encountered. So for example, if I have more than one Python, then this which Python is going to show me that I'm using the Python in Anaconda binaries, although there can be more Pythons here. So path is important to know that the order of path is important. It starts searching from the first directory existent, and it quits the search as soon as it finds one. The second one, the second thing to keep in mind is important to check for which of programs that we are running. Actually, if we have multiple copies of the same program in our system, which can be, for example, with Python. And the third thing that we were trying to come here from the beginning. So if I give this system a command, a script to run, it won't be able to run this because it's in none of these directories. It's basically in my home directory. It's in my home now. So how can I run this prep.sh from my command line? One possible way is to give the system in which path it can find it. So like this, you can find this executable in this path. If I try to run an executable giving a path, then it completely skips this step of checking path, and it just goes to this path and runs whatever executable there is. So this is one of the ways of executing it. The other way is giving a relative path. That's why when I do this dot and slash, which you can see a lot around, this means run the prep.sh in my current directory. So I'm basically giving it a relative path. This is really common, this type of running scripts. Or if I'm in CMD line course, then this time the prep is in the upper directory, right? Like this. So I can run the prep.sh in the upper directory. Or I can say run the prep.sh in my home directory. So as long as I describe it in some way, it's okay. But then wherever I am, if I go to week 4, for example, then I will have to keep track of running the prep.sh in 2 upper directory. This will correspond to my home now. So I will need to keep mentally track of that. And that can be tedious, especially if this is a really important script that you want to be running from every program. For example, this can be a preprocessing script that you may want to run for different data files. So the more systematic way of doing this is adding this path to your path variable. So basically the search that it did for the system commands, the same thing will be also including your own script. The systematic way of doing this is making a bin folder. I already have one in your home directory. So here in this bin we are going to put our executables. It's recommendable to make a separate file for this because this path folder is kind of important. Everything in it can be run, so we really don't want to use our home folder for this, but to make a specific folder so that we don't accidentally run things, basically. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to move the prep.sh to the current directory in bin, and it's now in here. And I will open up this path variable, and I will be adding preferably at the very end. By the way, this anaconda bin also supposed to be precede the path variable, because as I said, the order of the variables here is important. So I will put the anaconda library at first, and then this will be opened up as the current value of path, because I don't want to override path. I have some libraries, some folders here, but possibly path is by default checking more folders. So it's in general a very good idea to include the current value of path also in path. It will lead to these huge strings for path, but it's a bit tedious, but I think it's better than ignoring some kind of default path directory. Or you can make sure which kind of path directories are checked by default in your case, and then you can write each of them here. So here I'm going to add my home and then unread bin. So this says add until to the end of this path my starting from my home directory. This will be expanded and include the bin directory inside it. So let's see what is going to happen if I save this, and if let's use source this time. If I source this bashrc and if I echo the path variable now, first of all I can see that it's here at the end, edit. The second is the length of the path is has increased significantly. That's because now it includes first the anaconda bin is here, then this path was evaluated and all of these was written here. I think that is the end of it. Maybe not. I think this is the true end of it, yes. And then there is a bin, usr local bin, is bin, usr local bin, and then my project folder, and finally the last folder that I have added. Now, as soon as I source this bashrc, now I'm able to use this prep sh without giving any kind of folders. Basically, then the shell is going and checking this path, and here at the end of it, it is able to locate this executable, and then it runs this executable. In general, if you are adding things to path, it's a good practice to add notes about that. So for example, it's also good for future references because time will pass and you will forget for which kind of library you put these folders. So generally it's good to describe is this one is the Anaconda libraries, and these ones were the binaries that I was using. And for example, I will add home bin as the command line course scripts video example. So that's why I added this. In your bashrc, there can also be things that are added by programs. For example, when I was running my Anaconda, it added its init routine here. So every time my bash is run, the Anaconda does this conda init. Basically, so it can prepare itself to be used within that bash. So this is sometimes not only for you, but it's also okay for other programs to make additions. Usually they ask about this. So when I'm installing Anaconda, for example, it asks me, I'm going to be adding this part to your bashrc. Are you okay with it? And it's okay. I mean, if you skip that step, then you may need to go on and do this kind of setting yourself, which is more tedious. So that's in general okay to accept. That's it for the bashrc file. So I hope you like this example. I will be putting this one online so you can take parts of it that you like. As usual with Linux, please feel free to experiment and try, and only I think by experimenting you will really understand what works and what doesn't work for you. Have a nice day and see you in the next videos.